The unseen descent, how the soul breaks to awaken the force within. There's a moment in every chosen one's journey where the world they once knew begins to fall apart, not in a loud cinematic collapse, but in a silent, eerie unraveling. Nothing feels real anymore, and yet everything feels overwhelmingly raw. If you're going through this right now, let me tell you the truth that most spiritual teachings gloss over. Awakening is not beautiful at first. It's brutal, it's disorienting, it's dark. Because to truly awaken, you must first unlearn everything you thought was true about yourself. And that process isn't peaceful, it's violent in a soul-level way. You feel like you're dying, not because you're broken, but because your ego is being dismantled so your soul can finally breathe. This is the first dark shift, the collapse of identity. Everything you thought you were, your roles, your status, your ideas of success, your relationships, begins to dissolve. And you're left naked in your own consciousness, asking questions that have no answers. Who am I really? What am I doing here? Why do I feel everything, and yet nothing at the same time? This breakdown is sacred. It's not a glitch in the matrix, it is the matrix shattering. And yet, in those moments, you feel completely alone. You might be surrounded by people, but no one seems to see what you're seeing. No one feels what you're feeling. You start to wonder if you're going crazy. But what if I told you that this very isolation is a spiritual tactic? What if your separation from the world isn't a punishment, but a cocoon? Because the second dark shift is exile. This is when the universe begins to pull you out of your old environments, not because you failed, but because you've outgrown everything that's no longer aligned with your true frequency. Friendships fade. Family systems become strained. You can't unsee what you've seen, and so you can no longer play the old games. But this withdrawal isn't just external, it's internal. You begin to lose access to the parts of yourself that once functioned on autopilot. You can't fake small talk anymore. You can't perform for approval. You can't pretend to care about things that used to define you. And that loss of self is terrifying, but it's also the beginning of truth. Have you ever sat in silence, only to be ambushed by every fear, regret, and wound you've ever buried? That's the third dark shift, the surfacing of the shadow. This is when your unconscious begins to rise like a tide, and all the parts of you that were hidden, suppressed, or denied come crashing into your awareness. Childhood wounds you thought you moved on from. Emotions you were taught to suppress. Patterns you've repeated for lifetimes. They don't just knock, they invade. And it feels like emotional chaos. But this is where the real alchemy begins. Because chosen ones are not meant to bypass the dark. They're meant to transmute it. That means you don't run from your pain. You face it. You feel it. You let it speak. And in that raw confrontation, you reclaim the power that was trapped inside it. Your anger, when honored, becomes boundaries. Your grief, when fully felt, becomes compassion. Your shame, when seen with love, becomes wisdom. But none of this happens if you skip the shadow. You must go there. You must sit with it. You must listen to the wounds until they turn into weapons of light. What most people don't understand is that spiritual awakening is not a straight line upward. It's a spiral. It loops. It brings you back to the same themes again and again, but each time with deeper intensity. This is the fourth dark shift, timeline collapse. Suddenly, things that made perfect sense before no longer fit. You look at your career, your relationships, your goals, and they feel like someone else's life. That's because they were. They belong to a version of you that no longer exists. So now you're in the void. The old has died, but the new hasn't arrived yet. And in that in-between, you feel lost, directionless. There's no map, no checklist, no external validation to guide you. Just a whisper in your soul that says, keep going. And this is where most people turn back. They run to comfort, to distraction, to anything that makes them feel in control again. But the chosen ones, we stay. We sit in the darkness until our eyes adjust, until we realize that the void isn't empty, it's full of potential waiting to be shaped by our courage. Have you ever asked yourself, what part of me has to die for the real me to be born? That's the question that haunts you in these dark shifts. That's the medicine hidden in the pain. Because these shifts are not here to break you. They're here to reveal you, but only if you're willing to let go of who you were programmed to be. Only if you're brave enough to stop performing for love and start living from truth. That's what chosen ones are tasked with. We don't just heal ourselves, we become the healing. We don't just awaken to escape suffering. We awaken to transform it, to hold it, to guide others through it. And that path is not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, with loss, with the kind of growth that no one sees but you. But that's why you were chosen, because you have the capacity to walk through hell and come out carrying light. Not just for yourself, but for the world. And if you're in that darkness now, let me tell you, you're not lost. You're becoming. The void is not empty. It's calling you to rebirth the self beyond the self. There comes a point in the journey where everything stops making sense in the way it once did. You wake up and feel like you're floating inside a reality that no longer responds to your intentions, no longer reflects your identity, no longer supports the version of you that has been slowly dying. This is the void, not a place of punishment, but a sacred womb of nothingness. It's the fifth dark spiritual shift, and it's one of the most misunderstood. People think the void is the end, but the void is actually the beginning. It's where the old you is completely dissolved, so the new you can emerge, not as an upgrade, but as an entirely new frequency. You can't rush the void. You can't bargain with it. You can't logic your way out of it. All you can do is surrender. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Surrender feels like death to the ego. It means you no longer control the outcome. You're no longer driving the ship. And in that space of deep uncertainty, your soul begins to whisper. Not with words, but with sensations, feelings, subtle codes. That's when you start to remember. You are not here to be who you were. You are here to become who you truly are. The void strips away illusions with surgical precision. It removes jobs, friendships, habits, even dreams that were built from survival, not from alignment. And it doesn't ask for your permission. It just takes. Until you're standing there, stripped of all scaffolding, wondering if there's anything left worth saving. But that's when the most powerful realization arrives. You were never those things anyway. You begin to see that the life you lost wasn't really yours. It was the life you built to be accepted, to be safe, to be loved in a system that never saw your soul. And in that terrifying freedom, you start to glimpse something real, a flicker of your essence, a deeper intelligence that doesn't speak in language but in resonance. That's the self beyond the self, the version of you that existed before conditioning, before trauma, before fear taught you to shrink. That version doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply is. And when you begin to embody it, everything changes. Not because the outer world shifts overnight, but because your inner world becomes unshakable. But before that embodiment happens, there's another shift, one that often goes unspoken because it's so hard to admit. The sixth dark spiritual shift is disillusionment with the spiritual path itself. Yes, you heard that right. After all the awakenings, downloads, and insights, you begin to question everything, even the very practices that once saved you. You feel betrayed by the very tools you thought would lead you to enlightenment. Meditation feels dull. Rituals feel empty. Teachers sound hollow. You see through the spiritual performance, the marketing, the ego dressed in robes. And it hurts, because you wanted to believe. You wanted to find a space that felt pure. But here's the truth. This disillusionment is a necessary purge of spiritual fantasy. It's the moment where your soul stops outsourcing its wisdom to external systems and starts reclaiming its own direct connection to Source. You no longer need a middleman. You no longer chase experiences. You start to embody truth, not just talk about it. This is the death of the seeker. And in its place, the presence of the knower is born. Ask yourself this. What if everything you once believed about growth, healing, and enlightenment was just the scaffolding to guide you inward? What if the true spiritual path is not about becoming more, but becoming less of what you're not? Less performing, less seeking, less trying to be spiritual, and more simply being real. This is the path of the chosen one. It's not about light shows and magic tricks. It's not about floating above the world. It's about descending so deeply into your own being that you reach the still point at the center of all things. And from that place, you don't teach with your words, you teach with your presence. You don't preach from a pedestal, you live from your pain, your truth, your scars turned into symbols of power. That is the raw, unfiltered, unmarketable truth of becoming. And if you've made it this far into the darkness, you're already further than most. You're not broken. You're being forged. Because only those who've died this many times can carry the real light, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that guides. The death of the seeker, becoming the embodied truth you once chased. There's a moment on the path where everything you've been searching for begins to lose its glow. Not because you failed to find it, but because you realize it was never outside of you to begin with. This is the death of the seeker, a quiet, almost invisible shift that breaks you open from the inside. At first, it feels like another loss. You no longer feel the rush of discovery, the high of spiritual insight, or the thrill of learning something new. You wonder if you've plateaued, if you've missed something important, or if maybe you were never meant to awaken at all. But here's what's really happening. You're no longer chasing truth, you are becoming it. The seeker was necessary in the beginning. It gave your soul a direction, a longing to follow. But eventually, the seeker must dissolve, because the one who seeks is always separate from what is sought. And the truth is, you were never separate. You just didn't know how to sit still long enough to see it. When the seeker dies, a new being is born. This being doesn't need to explain or understand everything. It doesn't need to convince others or accumulate spiritual credentials. It simply is. And this new state comes with a strange power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that transforms just by existing. You begin to notice that people feel different around you, even if you say nothing. Your presence disrupts illusions. Your energy triggers awakenings, and you didn't do anything dramatic. You just stopped pretending. You stopped trying. You stopped performing. That's the paradox. The more you let go of being spiritual, the more spiritual you become. Because spirituality was never supposed to be a costume. It was supposed to be your natural state. And when you return to that state, you don't ascend above the human experience, you descend more fully into it. with a kind of grace that doesn't need to be seen to be real. But this descent comes with its own challenge. The seventh dark spiritual shift is perhaps the deepest of all: spiritual loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the ache of realizing that few people truly understand what you've been through. You can be in a room full of people and still feel like a ghost. You've seen too much. You've died too many times. Your eyes carry wisdom that others aren't ready to receive. And so you stay quiet, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because you know everyone is on their own timeline. You know not all seeds are ready to sprout. But that doesn't make the loneliness easier. It just makes it sacred. You begin to realize that spiritual loneliness is not a punishment, it's a mark. It means you've touched something eternal. It means you've remembered who you are beyond the veil. And yes, it means you'll walk alone at times, but not forever. Because when you hold your frequency long enough, others will rise to meet you. Not many, but the few who do will be mirrors of your soul. This is when everything changes, not because your life becomes easier, but because you become unshakable. You stop needing things to go your way. You stop needing people to validate your path. You stop needing the universe to prove anything to you. You simply live from truth, and that truth radiates through your choices, your silence, your eyes. You no longer seek happiness, you embody peace. You no longer wait for permission, you move with purpose. And this is not arrogance, it's not superiority, it's clarity. It's the kind of clarity that only comes from walking through fire and learning not to flinch. You've faced your demons, not once, but repeatedly. You've sat in the void and didn't run. You've watched your own identity collapse and still chose to love what was left. That is the mark of the rare. That is the path of the chosen. And it's not something you can fake. It's felt. It's earned. It's lived. Now I want to ask you something that might shake you. What if your entire life, every loss, every heartbreak, every dark night was not a detour, but a design? What if your wounds were your wombs? What if the pain you've endured was not the enemy, but the invitation? You see, most people wait for the light to find them, but chosen ones become the light through the darkness. We don't wait to be saved. We remember that the soul didn't come here to be safe. It came here to evolve, and evolution is messy. It's wild. It's full of ego deaths and sacred rage and cosmic confusion. But it's also stunning. It's liberating. It's the return to the self you were, before the world told you who to be. That's what all these dark shifts are doing. They're not destroying you. They're revealing you, layer by layer, lie by lie, until only the truth remains. And that truth? It's quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just is. You begin to walk differently, not because you're better, but because you're grounded. You begin to speak differently, not because you're trying to sound wise, but because you're no longer afraid of your own voice. You begin to love differently, not from need or fear, but from overflow. You become a living transmission, and you understand that not everyone will get you. That's okay. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be true. And truth doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it breaks things. Sometimes it burns things down. But it always leads to freedom. And that chosen one is what you came here for, not comfort, not conformity, but cosmic freedom in human form.